In the world of high-stakes diplomacy, few meetings will be as closely watched as the upcoming visits of Keir Starmer and the French President Emmanuel Macron to Washington this coming week. And as Trump flexes his muscles at the beginning of his second term, his overtures to Moscow, his hardening stance on Ukraine, that has sent shockwaves through European capitals, and prompted a desperate bid by the continent's two nuclear powers to influence the former and now future President of the United States. It's an interesting situation. At the heart of these visits is an attempt to prevent Trump from rushing headlong into a ceasefire deal with Putin that could all but guarantees Ukraine's capitulation. The concern is not merely rhetorical. Trump's recent description of Zelensky as a dictator, an accusation that Kyiv's European allies find both baffling and alarming, suggests a radical realignment of Washington's position on the war. And both Macron and Starmer aim to persuade Trump that securing Ukraine's future is not an act of charity, but a necessity for global stability and American strategic interests. And part of this process is to try and understand where Trump got his idea that Zelensky is a dictator in the first place, where Trump got his pro-Putin infection. And without understanding that, without getting into Trump's head, you can't find a way to change Trump's mind. You need to sort of enter that right or left hemisphere, and then try and navigate your way across the cortexes to the other side. Trump's approach to foreign policy has long been characterized by a transaction, an instinct that Europe has struggled to accommodate. In the first term, he lambasted NATO allies for what he saw as the chronic underinvestment in defense, demanding that they contribute at least 5% of GDP to their militaries, far beyond the existing 2% of NATO that's a NATO guideline. Starmer and Macron will need to convince Trump that they are prepared to shoulder more of Europe's security burden in return for continued American support for Ukraine. The stakes are enormous. While both Britain and France have ruled out sending troops directly to Ukraine, their militaries have been working on contingency plans to provide robust air, maritime, land and cyber support to deter further Russian aggression. One proposal under consideration is the deployment of European peacekeepers to protect vital Ukrainian infrastructure, though Putin or the Kremlin has ruled this out as completely unacceptable. No NATO or crypto-NATO, pseudo-NATO military will be allowed in the area. But ports and nuclear facilities need to be protected, and while US forces remain in a deterrent capacity, ensuring that any Russian escalation would have consequences beyond Europe, again, that has to be worked out where they're going to be stationed. The biggest challenge facing Macron and Starmer is Trump's unpredictability. And unlike in 2017, when he entered the White House with little knowledge of foreign affairs, Trump now sees himself as a seasoned statesman. That's dangerous, because he's still a child in a toy shop having a temper tantrum. And European leaders need to tread very carefully. Arguing with Trump over his characterization of Zelensky or his admiration for Putin would be futile. Instead, the approach will likely center on appealing to Trump's self-image as a deal-maker and presenting continued Western support for Ukraine as a move that strengthens his hand in negotiations with China and with Russia. Macron, ever the grand strategist, will likely emphasize that a premature peace deal would embolden China in its designs on Taiwan. Starmer, more pragmatic, will make a different argument that European states are stepping up and that the only way to deter Putin from re-invading Ukraine or expanding his ambitions further is through continued American leadership. His message will be that Britain is ready to step up with greater military spending and strategic support, but that Trump's leadership remains indispensable. Beyond Ukraine, Starmer's visit to Washington will also carry significant implications for Britain's own defence policy. Reports suggest that he's considering bringing forward an increase in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, still not enough by Trump standards, a move designed to reassure Trump and the British electorate of his government's commitment to national security, but he will have to go further to get to the 5%. But it will come at a cost. Even this small, modest increase will come at a cost. Such an increase would require either tax hikes or cuts elsewhere, a decision that will inevitably spark domestic controversy. Meanwhile, Macron has been positioning himself as Europe's de facto military leader, with France considering an even more dramatic defence spending boost, potentially doubling to 5% of GDP, and his argument to Trump will likely be that Europe is finally getting serious about its own security, making it in America's interest to stay engaged rather than to disengage. And despite these efforts, there is no guarantee that either Macron or Starmer will succeed in changing Trump's mind. As former British ambassador to Washington, Kim Darroch, has noted, Trump doesn't do gratitude. Persuading him to maintain support for Ukraine will require offering something he can sell as a win to his base. Whether it be a stronger European-led security guarantee or a commitment to a post-war settlement that doesn't leave the United States indefinitely entangled in European security, who knows? European leaders are also racing against time. Trump has already floated the idea of negotiating a ceasefire in Ukraine that could see him standing alongside Putin in Red Square on May the 9th, commemorating the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany. For Macron and Starmer, their challenge is not just convincing Trump to support Ukraine, but also preventing him from making a grand diplomatic spectacle out of an ill-advised peace deal. Starmer's visit to Washington marks his first major diplomatic test since taking office, and he will need to walk a fine line, showing Britain's willingness to contribute more to European security while resisting pressure to capitulate to Trump's demands. Macron, for his part, is playing a longer game, seeking to entrench France's role as a global power while ensuring that Europe is not sidelined in whatever deal Trump ultimately brokers. The coming days will reveal whether their efforts bear fruit or whether Trump's vision of America first will once again leave Europe scrambling for answers. Whatever the outcome, one thing is clear: the future of European security and the future of Ukraine's survival may well hinge on what is said in these White House meetings in the next few days.